79 AD, the world ended for thousands of people in southern Italy. Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying cities in fire and ash. But hidden beneath that destruction was something no one expected. Hundreds of scrolls, perfectly preserved by volcanic heat. For centuries, they sat there, unreadable, until now. Today, thanks to AI and X-ray technology, we're finally hearing voices from a world that's been silent for 2,000 years. So what exactly are the Herculaneum Scrolls, and how are scientists reading them without touching them? If you were to visit the shores of the Bay of Naples in the summer of 79 AD, you would see Roman villas line the coast. It was paradise for Rome's rich and powerful. The bay was their playground, their retreat from the noise of the capital. But beneath this picture of peace and elegance, something else was brewing. Just behind those villas stood Mount Vesuvius, a mountain so deceptively calm that locals didn't even realize it was a volcano. The soil around it was rich, perfect for vineyards. Its slopes were dotted with farms. No one thought of danger. That would change in an instant. At around midday on August 24th, Vesuvius erupted. First came the ash cloud, a black column shooting miles into the sky. The wind carried that cloud south, dumping layer after layer of ash onto Pompeii. The city was buried slowly, suffocated under falling debris. People had time to run, to hide, to leave behind those haunting death poses we know today. But for Herculaneum, the story was far more brutal. Sometime after midnight, the volcano unleashed something far deadlier than ash. A pyroclastic surge, a boiling avalanche of gas, steam, and volcanic mud came roaring down the mountain at almost 200 miles an hour. The temperatures inside that surge ranged from 400 to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to boil blood and vaporize flesh in seconds. When it hit Herculaneum, there was no escape. Hundreds died instantly, their bodies charred where they fell. The force ripped through houses, burning wood, melting metal, turning everything organic into ash. What it didn't destroy, it carbonized. And here's where Herculaneum's fate split from Pompeii's. While Pompeii was buried in ash, Herculaneum was sealed under this pyroclastic flow, thick, heavy, and steaming with heat. Wooden beams, furniture, food, and even papyrus scrolls didn't crumble to dust. They were flash-fried, sealed like relics inside a volcanic tomb. That difference is why, 2,000 years later, Herculaneum's ruins are in some ways even better preserved than Pompeii's. But the cost was invisibility. Pompeii sat just a few feet below the surface, so when farmers dug into the ground centuries later, they struck walls, frescoes, and skeletons. Herculaneum, on the other hand, was buried under 75 feet of volcanic material. That's as tall as a 7-story building. It didn't resurface for over 1,600 years. It was as if the city had been erased. And maybe that's why so few people outside scholars know its name today. Pompeii is a tourist icon. Herculaneum is the forgotten sibling. While Pompeii was a bustling trading town, Herculaneum was the playground of Rome's elite. And in one of those villas, the Villa of the Papyri, lay a treasure so strange that no one at the time realized what it was. It was the mid-18th century, a time when archaeology was still more treasure hunt than science. King Charles of Bourbon ruled Naples, and his men were tunneling through hardened volcanic rock, looking for marble and artifacts to decorate his palaces. They weren't interested in history, they were interested in luxury. But as their picks and shovels cut into the buried city, they struck something far greater than gold. They stumbled onto a massive villa, larger, grander, and more luxurious than anything yet uncovered in the ruins of Pompeii. At first, it was just another discovery. The workers found walls lined with frescoes, floors covered in mosaics, and courtyards that opened into gardens. And then came the statues, bronze, marble, lifelike in every curve. In that villa, they found objects that looked like lumps of charcoal. Some were cylindrical, some broken. At first, workers thought they were chunks of wood, burned beyond recognition. The tragedy is that they couldn't just be unrolled. Try peeling one apart, and it crumbles. For centuries, they were left in storage, fragile black relics that mocked historians with their silence. Everyone knew they contained secrets, but no one could reach them. Its significance increases even more when you get to know who this villa belonged to. The villa belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar himself. Piso was a patron of the arts, a lover of philosophy, a man who filled his home with scholars and poets. And it was in this home, under nearly 75 feet of volcanic rock, that history had left a time capsule no one expected. The workers, digging deeper, began finding what looked like charred logs. Black, brittle and oddly shaped, they were tossed aside without much thought. Some were stacked like firewood. One, in fact, was even thrown into a fireplace, where it crumbled instantly into ash. To the untrained eye, that's all they were, nothing worth saving. And then, in one careless accident, everything changed. One of the supposed logs was dropped, and it cracked open. Inside, faint Greek letters appeared written across the surface. It wasn't wood at all. It was papyrus, rolled tightly, charred to a crisp, yet still holding the faint, fragile handwriting of an ancient scribe. Over the years that followed, nearly 1,800 scrolls were recovered from the villa of the Papyri. Some were pulled carefully from the debris. Others were ripped out carelessly in the rush for treasures. But even with the loss, what remained was, and still is, the largest ancient library ever discovered. Nothing else comes close. But the scrolls were only part of the story. The villa itself was a wonder. Sprawling over terraces that looked out toward the sea, it was filled with art, designed not just to impress, but to overwhelm. There were over 90 bronze and marble statues, philosophers, athletes frozen mid-motion, and gods in moments of power. The frescoes splashed with colour. The gardens themselves were no less extravagant. Archaeologists have identified shaded walkways, fountains, pools and orchards where Piso and his guests would stroll, debate, or simply show off the wealth that only Rome's elite could summon. If Pompeii reflected the life of the many, the villa of the Papyri reflected the tastes of the few but powerful. Today, if you want to see what this place might have looked like, you don't have to go to Italy. Across the ocean, in California, the Getty Villa stands as a painstaking reconstruction. Built in the 20th century, its walls and gardens were modelled directly after Piso's villa. Visitors there walk through the same walkways, the same courtyards, seeing statues cast from the same moulds as those pulled out of Herculaneum. It's the closest glimpse we have into what life must have been like in that long-lost mansion by the sea. But if technology has finally given us the tools to unlock the villas without destroying them, then we might be on the brink of the greatest discovery in classical history. For centuries, the greatest library ever recovered from the ancient world has sat in silence. Scholars knew it was there. They could see it, even smell the brittle carbon of the scrolls in their hands. But they couldn't read it. The words were trapped, locked in a prison of fire and rock. The problem was cruelly simple. The scrolls couldn't be opened. Early attempts were disastrous. In the 18th and 19th centuries, archaeologists and scholars tried every trick they could imagine. They dampened the scrolls with water or vinegar, hoping the papyrus would soften enough to peel apart. They sliced into them with knives, convinced they could separate one layer from the next. Chemicals were poured on them, steam was applied, and even early mechanical devices were built to slowly tug the layers apart. But nothing worked. That's where the frustration set in. Scholars had in their possession a treasure that could rival the great library of Alexandria. And yet, the moment they tried to reach inside, the whole thing collapsed. Even the fragments that survived were agonizing to work with. A scroll rarely came apart neatly. Instead, it broke into dozens, sometimes hundreds of thin slices. Scholars were left with a puzzle that had no edges, no complete picture, and missing pieces. And yet, even from this chaos, a picture began to emerge. Most of the scrolls turned out to be philosophical treatises, written in Greek. The dominant voice was Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC. The contents revealed so far lean heavily toward philosophy, especially works connected to the Epicurean school, a way of thinking that prized pleasure, not in the shallow sense of indulgence, but as freedom from pain, fear, and superstition. There were arguments about life, death, the gods, and the nature of reality itself. In other words, the kind of things that shape civilizations. In these fragments, scholars found entire worlds of thought, discussions of how to balance pleasure and pain, debates about justice, virtue, and friendship, even explorations of literature and music. There were also hints of Latin texts. Some scholars speculated that works by the Roman historian Ennius, or even lost speeches of Cicero, could be hiding in the collection. The possibility that these scrolls might contain unknown masterpieces of Roman literature kept excitement alive, even as frustration mounted. That frustration has been passed down from one generation of researchers to the next. Each century brought new methods, small victories, and larger failures. By the 20th century, the situation looked hopeless. The scrolls were simply too delicate, too damaged, and too fused together. Scholars could read fragments, yes. They could reconstruct portions of Philodemus, but the vast majority remained a solid black mystery. And yet, this is where the story shifts. Because just when it seemed that these scrolls would remain forever silent, the modern age brought something no Roman, no Bourbon king, no 19th century antiquarian could have imagined. The solution didn't come from archaeology. It didn't even come from history. It came from medicine. From the world of technology designed not to unlock books, but to peer inside the human body. X-rays, CT scans, imaging techniques, the same tools that doctors use to look at bones and tumors without cutting into flesh, suddenly seemed like the perfect key. What if the scrolls could be read without ever unrolling them? That was the idea, and it changed everything. For the first time in 2 millennia, there was real hope. Enter Brent Seales. Seales is a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky, and for most of his career, he's been obsessed with one question. Can modern technology bring dead text back to life? He wasn't trained as an archaeologist, but maybe that was the point. He looked at the scrolls not as fragile relics, but as data locked inside a corrupted hard drive. And just like a corrupted file can sometimes be restored with the right software, he believed these ancient scrolls could be virtually unwrapped, layer by layer, without ever being touched. It sounds almost like science fiction, but the idea is very real. It's called virtual unwrapping. The concept borrows directly from medical technology. When doctors want to see inside your body, they don't cut you open. They scan you. A CT scan, computed tomography, uses X-rays to slice through the body without ever touching it. It takes thousands of images from every angle, then rebuilds them into a 3D model. A doctor can rotate that model, peel away skin and muscle, and look directly at bones or organs. Seales realized the same principle could apply to a scroll. Instead of cutting or unrolling the papyrus, why not scan it like a body? The scroll would remain intact. The destruction would stop. For the first time in history, scholars might read every word without touching a single fiber. But before testing this on the Herculaneum Scrolls, Seales needed proof. He needed to show the world that virtual unwrapping wasn't just a theory, it worked. That chance came in 2016 with the discovery of a charred Hebrew scroll at En-Gedi, an ancient Jewish site near the Dead Sea. The scroll had been reduced to a lump of ash by fire more than 1,000 years earlier. No one dared touch it, but Seales and his team scanned it with micro-CT, generating thousands of digital slices. On the computer, they virtually unrolled it, smoothing out its layers like unfolding an invisible map. And there it was, the Book of Leviticus, crisp Hebrew letters glowing from inside a lump of coal. A text unread for centuries, suddenly revealed, word for word, as if the scroll had never burned. That moment was revolutionary. It proved the impossible was possible. If Seals could read a burned Hebrew scroll, then maybe he could do the same with Herculaneum. The villa's library, though, was a different beast. These scrolls weren't just damaged, they were the most fragile artifacts on Earth. Some were twisted like corkscrews, others were crushed into dense, fused lumps. And they weren't written in neat ink that stood out from the page. No, the ink was carbon-based, the same substance as the papyrus itself, which meant that on a CT scan, the ink and the page looked almost identical. To the naked eye, there was no difference. The scrolls looked like solid blocks of black. This is where the process had to evolve. Seals and his team built a system that could scan each scroll with micro-CT, rotating it slowly while the machine fired X-rays through it. Each scan produced up to 10,000 images. Put together, that data added up to more than 1.3 terabytes, an enormous digital fingerprint of the scroll's interior. The resolution was astonishing, down to less than the thickness of a human hair. The scrolls were no longer untouchable. They could now be turned, stretched, and sliced digitally, their inner layers laid bare without a single crack. But even then, there was still the problem of ink. On the scans, ink and papyrus blended into one. That's where artificial intelligence stepped in. The team trained algorithms to hunt for patterns invisible to the human eye. Just as facial recognition software can distinguish a stranger's face in a crowd, these algorithms learned to distinguish ink from carbon, letter by letter. It wasn't perfect, not at first, but with enough training, the AI began to see what no one else could: faint traces of ancient handwriting hiding in the noise of the scan. And here's where irony enters the story. Those same broken scrolls that early excavators destroyed became the key to saving the rest. Seals and his team fed images of those damaged scrolls into the algorithm. The AI studied them, learned what ink looked like, how letters curved, how strokes differed from the papyrus around them. In other words, the failures of the past became the training data of the future. Soon, the results started to show. The AI picked out faint Greek letters, hidden inside the black mass of papyrus. Words appeared, sentences formed. Scrolls once thought unreadable began whispering again. The scale of this effort is staggering. Each scroll requires hundreds of hours of scanning, months of processing, and relentless refinement of algorithms. And the possibilities don't stop at Herculaneum. Seals' virtual unwrapping technique can apply to any damaged manuscript, any burned, rolled, or fused text. The Dead Sea Scrolls, medieval charters, even artifacts from places destroyed by war or disaster today. A whole new frontier of history has opened up, all because of a marriage between medicine, computer science, and archaeology. And that leads us straight to the next question. Beyond the science, beyond the algorithms and the data, what knowledge is trapped within those blackened scrolls, waiting to speak again after 2,000 years of silence? In 2023, tech entrepreneur Nat Friedman, investor Daniel Gross, and computer scientist Brent Seals launched something extraordinary. They did what the internet does best. They turned it into a competition. They announced a $700,000 grand prize for anyone who could decode just 4 passages from 2 intact scrolls. Not 4 books, not even 4 pages, just 4 passages. That's how difficult this was. But that challenge was enough to attract hundreds of teams from around the world. Students, researchers, coders, and dreamers all chasing the same goal. Then, in October 2023, the world heard a whisper from the past. A 21-year-old computer science student named Luke Fariter made history. Using machine learning, he trained an algorithm to recognize faint patterns of ink hidden in the scans. And in one of those scans, a word began to emerge: porphyras, Greek for purple. For his discovery, Luke won $40,000, the first official First Word prize. It was a small sum compared to the grand prize, but symbolically, it was massive. And the domino effect began. Fast forward to February 2024. After months of coding, scanning, and collaborating, the impossible happened. A team of researchers finally managed to reveal about 5% of one entire scroll. That might not sound like much, but it was enough to read full sentences, even paragraphs, enough to prove this wasn't a fluke. For their achievement, the team claimed the $700,000 grand prize. 3 other teams also earned $50,000 runner-up prizes for major contributions. So what did they find? The text they uncovered appears to be a previously unknown work by Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BCE. His writings were already known to fill much of the Herculaneum library, but this particular text? It was something new, an essay about the pleasures of music and food, and how they affect the human senses. The momentum didn't stop there. With success on their side, the Vesuvius Challenge team set their next ambitious goal: to reveal 90% of the 4 scrolls that had been fully scanned. When you look at these blackened, fragile scrolls, it's hard to believe they could contain anything more than dust. But inside them is a voice from the ancient world that's been silent for almost 2,000 years. A voice that spoke about life, happiness, and how to live without fear. That's the philosophy of Epicurus. Now, Epicureanism isn't about wild feasts or constant pleasure, the way the word epicure makes it sound today. At its heart, it's actually very simple. Epicurus believed the best life is one free from unnecessary pain, fear, and anxiety. He taught that simple pleasures, good food in moderation, honest friendships, and peace of mind were the keys to happiness. One of his boldest ideas was aimed right at the biggest fear of all: death. Epicurus said, "Death is nothing to us." His reasoning was simple. When you're alive, death hasn't happened yet. And when you're dead, you won't be around to feel it. So why waste life being afraid of something you'll never actually experience? To the Romans, who were constantly obsessed with omens, afterlife punishments, and the will of the gods, this way of thinking was revolutionary and dangerous. The scrolls at the Villa of the Papyri contain the writings of Philodemus, a philosopher who carried Epicurus's torch into the Roman world. Philodemus wrote about ethics, poetry, how rulers should behave, and even the role of music in society. And what's so striking is that these aren't second-hand summaries. They're original works. That makes it priceless. 44 of the scrolls have been identified as works of Philodemus of Gadara, who was both a philosopher and a poet. One manuscript, Pherc. Paris too even contains parts of his book on vices and virtues, but here's where it gets even more incredible. Buried among these scrolls might also be lost works by other legendary thinkers, including Chrysippus, a Stoic philosopher who reportedly wrote over 700 books, all of them lost to time, until now. Among the fragments, scholars have found pieces of Chrysippus's writings like On Providence and Logical Questions. A third, still uncertain, might even be another lost text of his. And it's not just philosophy. One scroll contains part of a poem about the Battle of Actium, the famous naval clash where Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. In 2018, another papyrus revealed fragments of Seneca the Elder's Histories, a text thought to be lost forever. To put that into perspective, much of what we know about Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers in history, survives only because monks in the Middle Ages copied scraps of his work. Huge portions of his writing were lost forever. The same goes for plays, histories, and poetry. So when scholars talk about the Villa of the Papyri, they're not just excited about filling in gaps, they're talking about the chance of restoring voices we thought were gone for good. Some scholars believe there could be text from Epicurus himself. His writings were mostly lost to time, with only fragments and letters preserved. Finding a complete Epicurean treatise would be like uncovering a direct conversation with one of the ancient world's most daring minds. Yet there's another layer to all this. While scholars dream of recovering lost philosophy, not everyone looks at these scrolls through the same lens. Some see more than just knowledge, they see power. Ideas are dangerous. They always have been. In the wrong hands, a rediscovered philosophy could be twisted into something very different from what its author intended. Think about it. Epicurus preached freedom from fear, including freedom from the gods. In a world still shaped by religion and ideology, those words could ignite fierce debate. To prevent that from happening, they had to store them somewhere safe. Most of the scrolls, almost the entire surviving collection, are locked away in the National Library in Naples. Italy guards them with fierce pride, and it's not hard to understand why. These papyri are part of Italy's cultural DNA. They were buried in their soil, discovered by their people, and they represent a direct connection to Rome's past. Handing them over to foreign institutions, even temporarily, feels like giving away a piece of their identity. But this protectiveness creates problems. Many of the techniques needed to unlock the scrolls, such as high-resolution scanning, advanced computing power, and AI algorithms, are developed outside Italy. American universities, British research labs, and private companies all have the tools, the money, and the expertise. What they don't have is access, and that has led to years of tension between Italian cultural authorities and the international teams desperate to study these artifacts. Take the Getty Villa in California. The museum itself is modeled on the Villa of the Papyri, a kind of reconstruction of the original. The Getty has long been at the center of debate, pushing for access to the scrolls and in some cases acquiring related artifacts. But every attempt to move the papyri abroad sparks outrage. Italian officials argue that once you allow foreign institutions to house or transport them, you risk losing control forever. And then there are the scholars. Even within the academic world, the question of how to handle the scrolls has split the community. Some believe the fragments should be physically reconstructed, piece by piece, in painstaking efforts that keep the original papyri intact. Others argue that's reckless. They push for purely digital methods, saying technology is the only safe way forward. But digital methods create their own tensions. Interpretation isn't a neutral act. A single word in Greek can change the meaning of an entire philosophical argument. A mistranslation can reshape how history remembers a thinker. So when one group of scholars claims priority over the texts, rival academics push back. Accusations of secrecy, ego, and academic monopoly have surrounded the project for decades. And behind all of this, there's the brutal reality: money. Unlocking the Herculaneum Scrolls isn't cheap. The scanning equipment alone costs millions. The computing power needed to process terabytes of data demands massive resources. Even training the algorithms to recognize the faint traces of ink requires time and funding. Universities can only cover so much, so private donors and foundations have stepped in. This is where competitions like the Vesuvius Challenge come into play. Launched in 2023, it invited computer scientists, students, and hobbyists from around the world to try their hand at reading the unopened scrolls using AI. The prize money ran into hundreds of thousands of dollars, funded by tech entrepreneurs who saw an opportunity to merge history with cutting-edge innovation. It was crowdsourced science, a digital gold rush. And it worked. The first readable passages were teased out thanks to competitors who weren't even classicists by training. They were coders and machine learning experts. But the reliance on competitions and donors raises its own questions. Should priceless cultural treasures depend on the whims of tech billionaires? Some critics argue that turning ancient knowledge into a competition risks trivializing it, treating philosophy like a video game challenge. Others say it's the only way forward. Traditional institutions move too slowly. Without private money and open competitions, the scrolls would still be nothing more than black lumps locked in a museum basement. That's the real tragedy here. The knowledge inside those rolls isn't eternal. Papyrus doesn't last forever, even when carbonized. The longer we wait, the greater the risk that entire texts will crumble before anyone has the chance to read them. That's why this fight over control feels so dangerous. Because while humans argue over who should get access, time itself is quietly destroying what's left. So the real question now is this: can humanity put aside rivalry long enough to unlock the past before it disappears forever?